Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back to Conversations in the Digital Age. With us is an old friend, Linda Fairstein. Linda Fairstein has led a double life. She has been a sex crimes prosecutor serving for 26 years in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and she has also been a novelist. She's written 17 mystery novels, all about a heroine named Alexandra Cooper. With us, she's going to discuss not only her new book, which is called Devil's Bridge, but she will also tell us her view of the St. Paul school date rape case, which made the headlines a little while ago. Linda, we're delighted to have you back with us.
Always good to be with you, Jim. Thank you.
Now, tell us about your book. This is the Alexandra Cooper series.
Yes.
Alexandra Cooper is a thinly disguised Linda Fairstein. Don't fool me. Right. She's a blonde sex crimes prosecutor.
And thinner. Yes.
Well, over 17 years.
There you go.
Who knows?
I use the write what you know adage, and I'd always wanted to write. Before I went to law school, my dream was to write fiction growing up. So I got back to it. I wrote a nonfiction book and then got permission to start a crime series. So the character is a sex crimes prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office. She's only 38. She is much more daring than I ever was, but she gets to do things sort of out in the field a lot with detectives, which parallels what we did in New York. This book is Devil's Bridge. It's the brand new one. And it's not a reference to Bridgegate, which your listeners in this area would be familiar with, but refers as a title to an old Celtic myth.
So Governor Christie's not a character.
Not a character. Could be.
In this
could be a suspect.
Play. You have everyone else in there.
Right. I do have a few locals.
The mayor and Al Sharpton and the Manhattan District Attorney.
Yes, some thinly disguised more than others. But yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's fun to use local scenes and places that people know. And for me, in doing these books, I've used New York City landmarks really in every novel. And the editor's first thought at the beginning of the series, well, how will this play out of New York? It's fun for people here because either they've seen these places all their lives, some they've visited, some they say, now I'll go. But the nice thing for me as a writer is I get mail from all over the world, and people in Oklahoma or New Zealand will say, I've never been to New York, but you give me a sense of place. I've seen the Statue of Liberty, of course, in movies and on TV shows, and now I feel like I've walked the pavement. So it's fun to do.
Well, now, Devil's Bridge, though, isn't in New York City. Devil's Bridge is in Martha's Vineyard, and it's not a bridge at all. So well, isn't that a stretch?
That's a stretch. Well, that's where I first heard the name. And it is, as you know, an underwater series of rocks, very deadly. That's why there's a lighthouse over the bridge. But it connected the vineyard when there was once assumed to be land there many, many centuries ago to the Elizabeth Islands and back to America. So I love the name. I love the sort of scary sound of the name and Jeopardy. But then I began to research the name, and that name comes from medieval myths, really in the United Kingdom. When people couldn't get from one side of a gorge to the other, they would make deals with the devil to build them a bridge. And my detective needed a deal with the devil near the end of the story, so it seemed to resonate for me.
Well, it certainly resonated for me because I couldn't put the book down, and I don't think anyone else will either. But in addition to landmarks such as the Statue of Liberty and the George Washington Bridge, and I guess the Manhattan DA's office, which has become a landmark for some people, you have restaurants that you like. Your favorite restaurant, Premola.
Shameful, isn't it?
In fact, the plot sort of takes off from Premola when the owner, Giuliano, escorts Alexandra into the street, and she meets with a little bit of misfortune.
Yes, well, it's funny. You and your wonderful wife, we share a taste for some of the same restaurants, and Premola's my favorite. When I started the series, authors do different things. Some of them make up cities and geographic locations. I'm using real streets and landmarks, and I figured the characters have to eat somewhere. Why am I making up restaurants when there are so many good ones in the city? And needless to say, the owners of the restaurants enjoy it. And the second book, I don't think it mattered, but 17 books into a series that's done nicely for me, people will come in from out of town and say, is this really where Alex Cooper eats or Linda Fairstein eats? And I've told Giuliano he has to give a free drink to anyone who comes in and mentions Devil's Bridge, so go right in, folks.
Well, he won't do it for my friends. But then you have another one of your favorite restaurants, Patroon and Kenneretsky, and then Alexandra stands up a date. Leaves him waiting there in Patroon. He's
Makes him a suspect.
Probably still there.
I'm not sure he likes it that much.
How could you do that to a guy?
Well, I didn't strand him in a bad place. I mean, Patroon's got a great bar and a great menu, and Ken and Stefan will take care of him. So it's just fun for me to, it could be entirely made up. If you're reading somebody's book and it's about Kansas City, I wouldn't know. But here it's really nice because I can channel when I'm writing the scenes. I can channel the physical layout. I can channel what would happen. And there, Alex was going to do something, almost a tryst with an old boyfriend that she shouldn't have been thinking of doing. And
never know what will happen. One thing leads to another.
Right. So it makes him a suspect for a little while, the old boyfriend, and gets Mike Chapman, my detective, very annoyed. So it's just great fun to work it all in. So
let's segue from fiction to fact.
Yes.
We have this really difficult case in New Hampshire at the St. Paul's School where a senior in the school is indicted for rape and other counts of sexual assault involving a 15-year-old underclassman. What's your take on that case?
I was very distressed on several levels. The first was this whole practice at a very elite, as you know, and old boarding school, St. Paul's, with a great academic reputation, given us many statesmen and now stateswomen across the country.
John Kerry,
among
Robert
others.
Mueller, the FBI director,
that's right,
alumni of the school.
Yes. So great reputation, but apparently there's been a practice for at least a decade now called senior salute, which is not very tasteful, in which graduates, young men about to graduate, are supposed to, in their senior year, try to score in some way sexually with freshmen, with the lowest level underclass women. And so this young man charged in this case was at the top of the scoring board, trying to finish 2 days before graduation, getting to freshmen that he liked. Made a date, and I only know what I know, for I didn't go to the trial. It was not very well covered by New York media. There was some Boston Globe, some New York Times, some of the TV stations. So I don't know as much as I like, but what I don't know, I don't like. I don't think this case should ever have been brought into the criminal justice.
Now, why do you say that?
For a number of reasons. The young lady, and nobody likes to attack a 14, 15-year-old young woman. And I think that's part of the defense trouble in a case like this. You really can't go after her. I think she made some errors in judgment. I don't think she was forcibly raped. And I think that was proved over and over again throughout her testimony. She went to the encounter in a bizarre place. I mean, these dates were all made. They were supposed to happen on the top floor of a closed custodial kind of building. She went there for the purpose of meeting this guy for a sexual encounter.
Owen LeBrie.
Owen Labrie.
Star student, won awards, was admitted to Harvard, had a marvelous career ahead of him.
Yes, and the only thing I say about Mr. Labrie, not my kind of divinity student. The whole point, his whole career, he said, was directed towards divinity, so not exactly a moral compass to get this young lady up into
he
the
said
tower.
It crossed his mind to have sex with her, but then the divinity told him not to, and he stopped.
Which is one of the stranger, maybe better not to have used that during the defense. But they went into this room, and I am fully, having done this for more than 2 decades in the DA's office, I'm well aware the young lady could have made the decision to go to this encounter and still said no at any point in time, and no would have meant no. But she did go. She undressed herself. Nobody forced her to undress. That became clear. I think when you don't have a specialized sex crimes unit, I don't know how much the prosecutor got out of this story in advance. The young lady admitted on the stand, and I don't think the prosecutor knew this before the moment on the stand, that she had in fact been laughing and smiling throughout the sexual encounter. Now, how Mr. Labrie is supposed to know that she's either frightened or not willing when she's laughing is factually something that would be pretty impossible for a jury to figure as well. She did claim that she said the word no at some point.
3 times, she said.
3 times. She said she may have said it softly. She may have continued to laugh. One can say no, and that should be enough. If she continued, however, to do physical acts that suggested yes, that's where the real no, yes, verbal issue becomes so critical, and we'll talk about that later. But she continued to participate. And a telling moment for me and many prosecutors I've talked to, if we can be this candid, is at one point Mr. Labrie stood up from the ground to remove a condom from his pocket and put the condom on. I mean, that's a 90-second to 2-minute separation at least. She remained on the floor watching what he was doing. If she wasn't going to consent to that, why didn't she get up and step away? Very troublesome to me and to every prosecutor in the digital age, if we can, which was not really so much a problem when I left over a decade ago, is the texting afterwards. He tells her she's an angel. She says, "You're not so bad yourself." She says to somebody who supposedly has committed this traumatic act. She puts a few ha-has in her email. I will tell you, the first time I ever saw an email or text after an allegation that said LOL, laugh out loud, or ha-ha, I don't see the trauma anywhere. He's not in her presence. He's not a threat to her at this point.
Because rape's a crime of violence.
It is a crime of violence, and a very traumatic one. So she's still laughing, and there are French endearments, terms of French endearment, mon amour, mon cher, something like that in this, which I've never seen an actual victim of a sexual assault do, not under the threat of physical harm when she's back safe in her room. She gets to the school nurse a couple of days later, and all she's concerned about is pregnancy. The nurse asks her if the sex was consensual. She said yes. And the 2 things I've not seen anywhere in the media, so we'll try them out with you. One is her older sister was a senior, the same age as Mr. Labrie, graduating the same day. She'd been having problems, she says in text to Mr. Labrie, getting along with her sister. Her sister was disapproving of what she'd done. So all she asked of Mr. Labrie was that this encounter not be made public, that he not brag about it, text about it, talk about it. I think pretty unrealistic among the whole high school set, both the young men and women. And I, for one, think that the report only happened after the sister, graduation day, heard rumors that the younger sister, the accuser, had been involved with Mr. Labrie. The older sister herself, the graduate, had had a sexual encounter with Mr. Labrie earlier in the year. So I'm not sure if that is not what turned the consensual encounter into an allegation of force. But I don't see the force anywhere. The jury didn't see the force.
So you can say no before, you can say no during, but you just can't say no after.
And you cannot say no after and reply it retroactively.
So it's a case of regret sex.
Maybe it seems to be. That's what the jury seemed to buy as well. And the last point I want to make, because it happened in a case of ours in our unit 30 years ago, I'd be very interested to see, and I don't think it'll happen till after Mr. Labrie is sentenced, whether this young lady's family is planning, as I would just guessed, pure speculation, a lawsuit against St. Paul's. Their anger has been directed to the school, to this horrible tradition of senior salute, to scoring young women, and it seems that people in the administration knew, people in the faculty knew, certainly every senior about to graduate knew. If there is a lawsuit against the school, it gives the young woman a motive to lie. It gives the young woman a motive to testify falsely. One of the great young lawyers who worked for me in Bob Morgenthal's office, worked with me, but in my unit, tried a case. It was a date rape, very difficult, 30 years ago, as I said, got a conviction, and after the sentence, the next day after the sentence, the young lady filed a lawsuit against the defendant himself, who had a very deep pocket. And our higher courts in New York threw out the case because the prosecutor had argued, as they did in this case, that the victim, the accuser, had no motive to lie. And the court said, in its opinion, she had a motive for every dollar in that lawsuit. In our case, $8 million, 8 million motives to lie. And the case was reversed on appeal, thrown out, and retried. And I just will be fascinated to see if, in fact, there's a lawsuit against St. Paul, and whether that in any way had the parents kind of leaning on this young lady to exaggerate her story. I don't think it's a made-up story. I think it's sadly exaggerated.
And, I mean, can this case possibly withstand a appellate review when you think of the problems in the proof? I mean, the evidence was riddled with reasonable doubt. There were inconsistencies, both on the part of Labrie and on the part of the accuser. He testified at trial that there had been no consummation of the sexual act, while he told all his friends there was.
Yes.
And she testified that she had objected and there was no consent, but then her testimony was, as quoted in the paper, other than me saying no to the first part, I don't think he would have known for a fact that I would not want to do that.
Yes. Seconded by the laughter throughout. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, how could you possibly sustain a conviction on that ground?
I'm with you entirely, and you've asked, I think, the most important question. For your viewers to keep in mind, he was not convicted of forcible rape, Labrie. He was convicted of luring a minor on the internet. Now, you look at the statutory the legislative history of that statute. It's absurd. That statute is meant for the 53-year-old guy in a hotel room who's texting a girl saying, I'm Justin Bieber's older brother and I'll meet you at the concert, and then, come back to me, and pretends to be 19 to lure her to a sports event, a singing concert, a prom. It's not meant for the kids who know each other, who were asked to an event, and then he just follows it up with an email or a text, see you later. So I think that's going to get thrown out. And the statutory charges in most states wouldn't even be sustained because you have to be over a certain age and under. These were two kids getting together for a sexual encounter even short of intercourse. There's even a text from Labrie to the young lady before she reports anything that says, when you in fact do lose your virginity, I hope the guy is good to you, which sort of supports his claim that they never really consummated the act, or not for lack of trying, apparently, or his divine intervention.
Two teenagers fumbling.
Two teenagers fumbling, and there just seems to be no sign of force, and I really don't know how this case will stand.
There has been an evolving standard of rape in this country. I mean, when I went to law school, which was more moons ago than I care to remember, rape necessarily involved force. And I think in New York it still has an element of force. It has to be made out.
Yes.
Yes. But there seems to be a trend exemplified by New Hampshire and possibly other states, although they're still in the minority,
yes,
that lack of consent is a substitute for force, and now we're evolving to the point where there has to be affirmative consent. So it's no longer no, it's yes, yes. And, where are we heading, and is this going to make it impossible to make out a case of rape?
I'm laughing with your just absolutely apt description, and certainly not at the circumstance of the allegations or the crime. It has been a long and winding road. And you may recall 15 years ago there was a movement on college campuses to require contracts. I don't know if you knew this in dating, because people obviously consulted with colleagues of mine doing prosecutorial work, where a date was supposed to begin. And many colleges, especially in the Midwest, got to this point. I think it was Oberlin and Antioch, which the woman, at the beginning of the evening, was supposed to hand a contract to the man saying, do you agree and understand that I will do no more than kiss you on this date? There will be no intercourse. And,
notarized witnesses?
No notary, no witnesses. But to have, as a matter of fact, after the engagement, and it's not the way we socialize. It's simply not the way evenings and afternoons and encounters occur. And I am not in favor of this affirmative consent. I think no means no is fine. I think an unwillingness to communicate consent to an act, all of the standards that we have now, if this young lady in New Hampshire said no and had acted consistently, got up and put her clothes on, she never said he threatened her, hadn't taken her clothes off in the first place, hadn't watched him put a condom on, you'd have the facts. I still think yes means yes will require the same factual rigors that no means no. Well, when did you say yes? And what did you say yes to? But then you kissed him, and when did you ever stop saying yes? So I think it's going to be a matter of fact. I think it's a little too easy by half to placate people by turning it around. I think factually, the prosecutor and the jury are in the very same place of trying to determine who's telling the truth.
And the consequences for the defendant are horrendous. The first was, we don't know her name. Her picture hasn't been in the paper. His picture was plastered all over the media. We know his name. His reputation is ruined. He's going to be branded a sex offender for whatever that happens to you in New Hampshire if you're branded a sex offender, and he may face serious jail time as a result of a conviction on the internet count. So, on the other hand, you have a trial where the evidence is so woefully inconclusive. But I wanted to ask you about this past summer. The legislature enacted the Enough is Enough law in New York, which applies to college campuses in the state. And there the evolution seems to have occurred in New York toward affirmative consent. The statute defines affirmative consent as a knowing, voluntary, and mutual decision among all participants to engage in sexual activity. Consent can be given by words or actions as long as those words or actions create clear permission regarding willingness to engage in the sexual activity. Silence or lack of resistance in and of itself does not demonstrate consent. So, I mean, are you comfortable with that kind of definition?
Not at all. And I think, again, you get back to the underlying facts is what's going to happen in every case. We know there's a problem with this issue on college campuses. We know that every survey suggests there are epidemic proportions of sexual misconduct, whether it's aggravated touching up to intercourse. It's all called sexual assault. And the fault of this is not alcohol, for example, and drugs. Yet, probably 70 to 80% of these cases involve the use of alcohol or drugs by one party or in most instances by both. And what does alcohol do? It changes your affect. And if you've said yes at this point and you've said you need my consent to do this, and then both parties start drinking voluntarily. I'm not talking about the horrible cases where a man involuntarily drugs a woman and she passes out and she's not communicative. But desires change, responses change, what you intend to do changes. And I think this is a well-intentioned but very badly mistaken attempt to put a Band-Aid on this issue when it comes down to the accuser having to face exactly the same factual attacks that she would if the answer was she had to say no, or silence silence is sufficient.
Harking back to fiction, we have E. Cummings' poem, part of which was, let's go, said he, not too far, said she, what's too far, said he, where you are, said she. So,
well, maybe,
that's only part of the poem that I can read on television. but that's the typical he said, she said case. But I wanted to ask you, I have a question for you. Maybe you've answered it, but should this case at St. Paul's School ever have been brought?
I think not. I think that this, and again, we're lucky because in New York City, in all 5 counties, and in many places around us, in all states and many counties, sex crimes units have been in existence since the 70s. And what they do is train prosecutors to know the problems and issues in every one of these cases. I feel badly for Mr. Labrie to have been exposed as you. I feel terribly badly for this 15-year-old to have been brought into a public courtroom, yes, her face and name shielded, but exposed to what she was, when it seems that the prosecutor didn't even know the inconsistencies in the case, that they were aired for the first time on a witness stand, which is just not the way it should happen. Did she have these? Did she not have these texts? Had she not asked the victim hard and fast questions? How do you account for those 4 days? Why is your outcry 4 days late? There are many good reasons, but if you don't have a good reason, it will undermine the case.
Undermine the case. Well, you've summed it up admirably. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. This has been just marvelous. I wish you had time to finish your thought, but thank you so much for coming by.
Thanks, Jim, for having me.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations in the digital age. Please visit our website at www.digitalage.org. I'm Jim Zirin. All the best.